So free beauty is occasioned by natural objects. Free beauty is the beauty I feel in the face of landscapes, roses, and so on and so forth. Dependent beauty by art. So dependent beauty is the beauty that I experience in the case of art. Why? Because here Kant argues purpose intervenes, namely the purpose of the artist. So free beauty is free of purpose, of the purpose of the artist. Free beauty is free from purpose. Dependent beauty is dependent on some purpose. The flower, in other words, does not seem to exist for any particular purpose. It's just there. Well, when we judge art, we end up talking about the purpose of the work that the creator had in mind. So the work of art then is dependent on the purpose, while the beauty of nature is free. The concept of purpose then circumscribes the free play of imagination. This is how Kant puts the matter. What does that mean? This means art does not lend itself to a purely aesthetic judgment. I keep asking myself about the purpose behind it. And that limits my aesthetic judgment, claims Kant. That means that aesthetics based on the pure judgment of taste fails to do justice to art. This is the implication that Gadamer draws, and here he slowly enters into this critique of Kant. He says, isn't that surprising that here we have, a critique of taste which actually can do little justice to a philosophy of art. So here's the implication that Gadamer draws. He says, free beauty is not beauty proper. Or if it is, then art is more than mere beauty. Aesthetics, he says, must surpass the pure aesthetic judgment. So even if you see Gadamer claims, even if we agree with Kant's description of aesthetic judgment, even if we do so, we are led to the realization that this kind of judgment doesn't do full justice to art. This, Gadamer further suggests, is Kant's own realization that we come across in his description of this distinction between free beauty and dependent beauty. There is a certain privileging of free beauty, but artistic beauty is clearly dependent. So there can be no harmony of imagination and understanding if understanding is banished and inert. Alongside the descriptions, so the first section in Gadamer's analysis is, of course, this distinction between, the second section is the doctrine of free and dependent beauty. That's what I was just commenting on. That's what you find on page 39. And then the section afterwards deals with the doctrine of the ideal beauty on page 41. And that's what I'm turning to now to clarify what's taking place. According to Kant, so here he just, you see through this distinction between, the free beauty and dependent beauty, and argue that, free beauty is the beauty that we experience in the case of nature, not art. But now, according to Kant himself, the human form alone can embody the ideal beauty. Why the human form alone? Because it's only in the human form, argues Kant, that we find the expression of the moral. And without this, without the expression of the moral, nothing can be universally pleasing. So the ideal beauty is found in human form. According to Kant, then, aesthetics cannot be a merely formalist aesthetics based on pure taste alone. In this regard, then, the doctrine of the ideal of beauty seems to contradict that of free beauty. And it seems then that with ideal beauty, we are led to something like a philosophy of Kant, but still, Gadamer says, both in fact lead to the same consequence. For where is the ideal of beauty expressed? In nature or in art? And Kant's answer is in nature. For nature itself, being without purpose, points to us as the ultimate purpose of its creation. So this unity of, the aesthetic and the moral is not found in art. It's found in nature, namely in human form. Nature thereby calls us to our own moral destiny. This is what you find expressed on pages 44, 45. If you look quickly at those pages, just the very bottom of the page, that's what I'm commenting on. So the last line on page 44, Um, so we can read what from the beginning of the paragraph. Kant writes, Gadamer writes, here the rejection of perfection aesthetics fits beautifully with the moral significance of natural beauty. Precisely because in nature we find no ends in themselves, and yet find beauty, namely suitedness or purposiveness, what is sometimes translated, to the end or purpose of our pleasure, nature gives us a hint, as Kant puts it, that we are in fact the ultimate end, the final goal of creation. And so he goes on to say, the dissolution of the ancient cosmological thought that assigned man his place in the total structure of being and assigned each entity its goal of perfection gives the world, which ceases to be beautiful as a structure of absolute ends, the new beauty of being purposive for us. So this is the Kantian distinction from antiquity, where the human form alone becomes the ideal of beauty, because it's the human form alone that is expressive of the moral. So the implication that follows from this, Kant's subjectivization of taste leaves room not only for a merely aesthetic, that is, formal approach to art, the possibility remains open that art might have a claim to truth. For this is what Kantian aesthetics, subjectivized aesthetics, doesn't cover. It deals only with nature. It always privileges nature. An artwork then makes a demand of us. There is something that the artwork invites us to understand. And then to understand this, we need more than pure taste when judging it. So the Kantian categories are insufficient when it comes to philosophy of art. But then Kant himself knows this. And for this reason, he introduces the concept of genius. With the concept of genius, Kant himself surpasses the pure judgment of taste. Taste judges both natural and artistic beauty. Yet genius judges only art. So the concept of genius is specifically designed for art in Kant. But with this concept, Kant does not establish a distinction between natural beauty and artistic beauty. Rather, Kant says, through genius, nature gives the rule to art. So even though it seemed that, it's through genius then that we could offer something like a philosophy of art, genius in fact reclaims art from its apparent autonomy. It's nature that gives the rule to art. So again, you see this privileging of natural beauty of nature in Kant. The genius then brings art back into the sphere of the naturally beautiful. Again, it's nature that gives the rule to art. When it comes to art or nature, beauty has one and the same principle, and this principle lies wholly within subjectivity. It has to do with the interplay of subjective faculties. You see the implication that follows then. The implication is that art has nothing to do with truth. So then, what Gadamer especially wants to stress in his reading of Kant is that Kant always understood art in relation to natural beauty. Natural beauty was always the model. The question concerning the truth of an artwork is simply not Kant's question. What does this mean? It means, says Gadamer, that philosophy of art has not been Kant's concern at all. Kant simply leaves the space open for a philosophy of art, but he doesn't himself fill it. He leaves the space open because he draws a distinction between natural beauty and artistic beauty. He speaks of, one being free beauty, the other being dependent beauty. So the question how we are to understand dependent beauty being that it is dependent on a purpose is something that Kant invites us to address, but he himself doesn't address this issue in detail.